Good evening, folks. This is your ticker guy coming at you from Niceville, Florida. Well, just when I thought CNBC couldn't do anything more insulting, they topped themselves today. This afternoon, Steve Leisman came on CNBC Live to report that Nouriel Roubini had essentially jumped the shark. That is, he'd revised his economic forecast, and he also mentioned that there were some other things that possibly could happen going forward. Specifically, that we might need another stimulus bill. CNBC then proceeded to repeat that Nouriel Roubini was bullish and this was the reason that the stock market turned. And in fact, the market did go higher following those reports. Both Reuters and Bloomberg apparently picked this story up as well. Exactly where the original source came from, nobody knows. But Nouriel Roubini this evening, right after the market closed, apparently was rather distressed with the way that CNBC and perhaps others were characterizing his views. He issued a rather long press release in which he pointed out that he hasn't changed his economic forecast at all. That in fact, the recession that we are in has so far followed his plan, which was for a 24-month contraction, which means that growth would not resume anytime this year. He also originally forecast and reiterated today that his forecast for the next couple of years of growth is 1%, far below consensus, and that in order to achieve that, we might need a second stimulus bill. That's very different than the point of view that was presented to viewers on CNBC on several occasions today. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't the first time that CNBC has come out with something that has turned out to be a total load of bilge. In fact, if you remember what I have complained about several times, including when I was on the air with Dennis Kneale, was this whole situation with MBIA and AMBAC, where every day when the market was tanking, we'd all of a sudden have the wonderful people on CNBC pop up. Charlie Gasparino would say that there was some kind of a rescue deal in process, and magically the market would instantaneously reverse. It got to be like Pavlov's dog. You didn't even have to wait for him to actually show up. All they had to say was that Charlie was up next, and the market would go up 50 points. Folks, there needs to be some culpability here. This afternoon, after this report was voided, the futures in the aftermarket came back in quite substantially. If you bought this ramp this afternoon based upon the reporting that Nouriel Roubini had essentially called an early end to the recession, you may be very unhappy tomorrow. The market at the time this occurred was severely overbought. It's been severely overbought for the last 3 days on the short-term indicators. Today it actually reached the overbought level on the daily indicators. That is a very bad situation when the pressure that has been pushing prices higher turns out to, in fact, be false. Mr. Leisman and the rest of the CNBC crew will no doubt hide behind innocent mistake. That's fine. I believe that CNBC owes the viewers of this country and everywhere else an apology. Not just from Mr. Leisman, but from corporate management. I believe we'll see it when hell freezes over. Those people who bought into this market today may find themselves on the end of a very ugly surprise tomorrow. Oh sure, the market may go up, the market may go down. Take out a coin and flip it. You never know what it's going to do on any particular day, and we are in the middle of earnings season. But speaking of earnings season, my thesis has been quite a bit more bearish than Mr. Roubini's. Why? Because what I see when I analyze the data is that we have pumped our GDP, that is our output, in this country by about 30% over its natural organic level as represented by personal earnings. We've done this by pulling forward demand using credit. We think it's all fine and dandy to go out and charge up our credit cards and then HELOC out the money from our house, pay off the credit cards, and go do it again. Well, at some point, folks, you get to the point that you can't HELOC out any more money because the house isn't worth as much as you want to take out. We reached that wall. This is the reason for the housing collapse. It is the reason for the collapse of many financial institutions that wrote these loans that could never be repaid. And by the way, we didn't clear those bad loans off of anyone's books, including homeowners, by defaulting them, that is, making people go bankrupt, both businesses and individuals. Oh no, we swept them under the rug. We put them in programs like the TALF and TALP and TSLF and all kinds of other crazy alphabet soup nonsense, hiding it and sweeping it under the rug, and we have allowed the banks to continue to lie for the last 2 years about the value of the assets that they hold, with the most outrageous component of that behavior coming just this spring when mark-to-market was suspended. Folks, there's no way that we can possibly get back to trend growth within our economy until the excess carrying costs of all this bad debt are flushed out of the system. And there are only two ways to do that. You can either default all the debt or you can pay it off. We could pay it off as a country. It would probably take us 10 years as consumers to take 3% growth in our incomes, which is a fairly reasonable long-term assumption, and pay down an extra 30% of the GDP. It would take about 10 years. So we can sit here and have a moribund economy for the next decade, or we can force not only the homeowners and other consumers who took out bad debt to go bankrupt, which is what should happen when you take out debt you can't repay, but also for those people who made loans to you, knowing full well that you should not be able to repay them, we make them go bankrupt too. Now people say that would be systemic risk. Well, it might be systemic risk, but that's why we have an FDIC, that's why we have a Congress, and that's why we allocated $700 billion of taxpayer money. So that if your money is in a bank that goes bankrupt as a result of irresponsible lending, and by the way, irresponsible oversight and not stopping them from doing it 5 years ago when they should have, that the government will step in and cover it. Hey, it's still going to come out of your pocket, but at least it will get done, and at least the people on Wall Street will not make billions of dollars, stuff it in their pocket, and stick you with the bill. Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan have been making a great deal of money trading oil, trading other commodities, and, by the way, trading stocks. They're doing this as banks. In other words, they're gambling with a federal backstop of your money. When they're right, this works out really well, and they get to pay their people great big fat bonuses, which is exactly what you saw with the earnings reports from Goldman and JP Morgan. But when they're wrong, their problems become your problems, just like they did this fall. When Goldman's stock was in free fall, Charlie Gasparino asserts that the firm was going to fail. Well, you bailed them out, folks, and then they turned around and their thanks, instead of paying back the Treasury and giving them the profits from all of this speculation that they did with your money, they've pocketed it and they're going to distribute it to their associates. This is what we call crony capitalism. In the meantime, in the real economy, Harley-Davidson disclosed today, when they reported earnings, that their shipments of motorcycles were down 30% from year-ago values. Well, that's not surprising. That fits in exactly with what I've said. There's about a 30% contraction in economic activity that is coming. Freight loadings, down about 30%. Container shipments at Port of Long Beach, 25-30% off. Notice any kind of a pattern here? I've been talking about 30% for 2 years. Now all of a sudden it's starting to show up in the economic data. We as people in this country need to choose. We need to choose between taking our medicine, not only bankrupting the homeowner and the irresponsible borrower, which is happening whether we want it or not, but also forcing the irresponsible lender to go bust, which is the part that we have not insisted on, and we must. There are no other options, folks. 10 years or 2 years. Take your pick. Either way, this economic contraction is not over, and it is going to be long and painful. We're simply choosing how long, but not how painful. And in the meantime, for CNBC, I'm going to keep hammering on you until you get some even and balanced reporting on your network. No, not one token bear to go along with the bulls. I want to talk about the economics of the matter. I want to talk about the debt load. I want to talk about the Bureau of Economic Statistics, BLS. I want to talk about BEA and all of these other numbers. And I want to talk about the pulled forward credit demand, which nobody on your network ever discusses. And yet it is the central point in what has happened over the last 20 years. You don't want to talk about it because if you do, you would have to admit that this green shoots nonsense is just that. It's bull. We can't have a durable recovery. Oh, sure, we can try to inflate another bubble and try to kick the can again. But in terms of actually having a sound economy, it can't be done until those problems are solved. And CNBC and General Electric, their parent, both know it. I'm your ticket guy, and that's my view. Have a good evening.